The Genesis of Beginnings. An Introduction. The book of Genesis serves as the essential prologue to the biblical canon, acting as a foundational text that seeks to answer the most fundamental questions of human existence. Its title, derived from the Greek word for origin or birth, perfectly encapsulates its scope, as it chronicles the transition from the void of pre-existence to the birth of the universe, humanity, and eventually a specific nation. Spanning from the cosmic scale of the stars to the intimate domestic dramas of early patriarchs, the book provides the primary framework through which the rest of the Bible is understood. It is not merely a record of the past but a theological roadmap that identifies the source of life, the nature of morality, and the reason for the complexities of the human condition. At the heart of Genesis is a narrative tension between divine intention and human agency. The text begins with an orderly and good creation, asserting that humanity is uniquely crafted in the image of the Creator, endowed with dignity and purpose. However, the narrative quickly shifts to address the presence of suffering, toil, and death through the account of the fall. This introduction of moral conflict sets the stage for the book's primary movement, God's repeated attempts to offer grace to a fractured world. By the time the reader reaches the midpoint of the book, the focus narrows from the entire human race to a single family tree, beginning with Abraham. The central thesis of Genesis suggests that while humanity is prone to failure and internal conflict, a sovereign creator remains committed to a plan of restoration. This plan is expressed through covenants, solemn, binding promises that bridge the gap between the divine and the earthly. As the book moves from the vast horizons of the primeval history into the detailed family sagas of the patriarchs, it establishes that the good news of the Bible begins with a promise made to flawed individuals. Ultimately, Genesis functions as the seedbed for all that follows, ensuring that the story of the Bible is understood not as a series of disconnected events, but as a unified journey toward redemption. Part 1. Primeval History. The Creation. Chapters 1 to 2. The opening chapters of Genesis provide a sophisticated narrative regarding the origin of the cosmos, moving systematically from a state of formless chaos to a highly structured and functional order. In the initial scene, the earth is described as a dark, watery void, representing a lack of purpose and inhabitability. The creative process is then depicted as a series of divine commands that act like a blueprint for reality. By separating light from darkness, the waters above from the waters below, and the sea from the dry land, the Creator establishes the boundaries necessary for life to thrive. This transition suggests that the universe is not the result of a chaotic accident or a battle between celestial forces, but is instead a deliberate masterpiece where every element has a specific place and function. This movement toward order reaches its climax with the creation of humanity on the sixth day. Unlike the other elements of nature that are brought forth by command, the text describes the formation of humans with a unique level of intimacy and distinction. The central concept here is the image of God. This does not refer to a physical likeness, but rather to a functional and relational status. To be made in this image implies that humans are endowed with certain divine attributes, such as rational thought, creativity, and moral agency. It suggests that human beings are meant to act as representatives of the divine on earth, reflecting the character of the Creator through their actions and their ability to bring further order and beauty to the world. The detail in the second chapter of Genesis shifts the perspective from the vast, cosmic scale to a more focused, earthly environment. Here, the relationship between humanity and the ground is highlighted, emphasizing that while humans are made from the dust of the earth, they are animated by a unique divine breath. This duality defines the human condition as being both a part of the natural world and simultaneously set apart from it. The establishment of the garden and the specific tasks given to the first humans reinforce the idea that their primary purpose is one of stewardship and relationship. By placing humanity in a structured environment and giving them the authority to name the animals and care for the land, Genesis establishes that the transition from chaos to order is an ongoing project in which humans are active participants. The fall and its consequence. Chapters 3 to 5. The transition from the pristine order of creation to the reality of human suffering begins with the entry of moral evil in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. This pivotal moment is depicted through a choice made by the first humans to overstep their boundaries and define good and evil on their own terms, rather than relying on divine wisdom. By succumbing to the temptation to be like God, they broke the fundamental trust that sustained their relationship with the Creator. This act of rebellion introduced a spiritual and psychological fracture, immediately resulting in feelings of shame and a desire to hide. It signifies that moral evil is not merely an external force but a consequence of the human will choosing self-interest over the established order. The consequences of this choice led to the immediate loss of paradise and a dramatic shift in the human experience. The expulsion from the garden represents more than just a change of location, it symbolizes the loss of unhindered access to the source of life and peace. In this new reality, the ground is described as being cursed, meaning that the work which was once joyful and productive now becomes a source of toil, thorns, and sweat. Furthermore, the introduction of mortality ensures that the human journey now ends in a return to the dust from which it began. The narrative in the following chapters illustrates the rapid spread of this brokenness, moving from a single act of disobedience to the first act of fratricide between Cain and Abel, demonstrating that once the relationship with the divine is damaged, human relationships inevitably suffer as well. Yet, even in the midst of these severe consequences, Genesis introduces the first glimmer of hope and the promise of a future restoration. When the consequences for the rebellion are being handed out, there is a specific prophecy regarding a future descendant of the woman who would eventually crush the head of the serpent. This statement is often viewed by scholars as the first promise of a redeemer, suggesting that the loss of paradise is not permanent. Even as Adam and Eve are sent out of the garden, they are provided with coverings and the ability to have families, showing that the Creator has not abandoned humanity to their own failure. This balance of judgment and mercy establishes a pattern for the rest of the Bible, where the brokenness introduced at the fall is met with a persistent divine plan to bring humanity back to a state of wholeness. Judgment and Mercy. Chapter 6 to 11. The middle chapters of the primeval history shift the focus toward the intensifying conflict between human freedom and divine justice. As the population increased, the narrative describes a total saturation of evil, where the thoughts and inclinations of the human heart were consistently focused on violence and corruption. The nuance in this section is found in the emotional description of the Creator. The text does not depict a distant, cold judge, but rather a God who feels deep heart grief over the state of the world. This grief indicates that the coming judgment was not an act of impulsive anger, but a sorrowful necessity to prevent the complete self-destruction of life on earth. The account of the flood functions as a cosmic reset, a reversal of the creation process where the boundaries between the waters above and the waters below are removed, allowing the earth to return to its original formless state. However, the presence of Noah represents the persistent theme of mercy within judgment. Noah is described as a man who walked with God, serving as a bridge between the old world and the new. By instructions to build an ark, the Creator ensures that life is preserved through the catastrophe. This suggests that even in the face of total corruption, the divine intent is never to completely eradicate humanity, but to refine it and offer a path forward through a righteous remnant. Nuance is also found in the aftermath of the flood, particularly in the establishment of a new covenant. Once Noah and his family exit the ark, the first act performed is one of worship and sacrifice, which is met by a divine promise to never again destroy the earth by water. This covenant is unique because it is unconditional. It does not depend on human behavior but on the divine commitment to sustain the natural order of seasons and life. The rainbow is introduced as a visible sign of this restraint, serving as a reminder that the Creator has laid down his bow of judgment. This transition reinforces the idea that while humanity remains flawed even after the reset, the relationship between the divine and the earthly will now be defined by a patient endurance and a commitment to preservation. Reflections on Primeval History. Reflecting on the primeval history of Genesis reveals a profound cycle of order, fracture, and the persistent search for restoration. The movement from the initial creation to the dispersion of humanity at Babel suggests that the human story is defined by a tension between high potential and tragic reality. In the opening chapters, the transition from chaos to order establishes a vision of what life was intended to be: purposeful, harmonious, and lived in direct connection with the divine. The concept of being made in the divine image provides a foundation for human dignity, suggesting that every person possesses an inherent worth that precedes their actions or achievements. This starting point is crucial because it defines the benchmark for all that is lost in the subsequent chapters. The accounts of the fall and the subsequent spiral into violence offer a sobering reflection on the nature of human freedom. These stories suggest that the greatest challenges facing humanity are not merely external or environmental, but are rooted in the internal desire to operate independently of moral boundaries. The loss of paradise serves as a metaphor for the universal human experience of feeling that something is not quite right with the world. Whether expressed through the toil of work, the pain of broken relationships, or the reality of mortality, the consequences described in Genesis provide a vocabulary for the suffering and frustration that persist across cultures and generations. Perhaps the most significant reflection found in these early chapters is the persistent presence of mercy within judgment. The story of the flood and the eventual scattering of nations are often viewed as harsh, yet they contain an underlying thread of divine patience. Each time humanity reaches a point of total collapse, the narrative reveals a creator who provides a way through the crisis, whether it is a promise of a future redeemer, the provision of clothing for the shamed, or the preservation of a family in an ark. These chapters suggest that while justice is a necessary response to corruption, it is never the final word. Instead, the primeval history functions as a mirror, showing humanity its flaws while simultaneously pointing toward a hope that the original order and beauty of creation might one day be recovered. Part 2. Patriarchal History. The Call of Abraham. Chapters 12 to 25. The transition into the 12th chapter of Genesis marks one of the most significant shifts in the entire biblical narrative. After the universal scope of the primeval history, where the text dealt with the origins of the world and all of humanity, the focus suddenly and dramatically narrows to the life of a single individual named Abraham. This shift from the world to one man represents a new divine strategy. Instead of dealing with the nations of the earth as a whole, the Creator chooses to work through one specific family line to eventually bring a blessing back to all people. This call is characterized by a radical demand for faith, as Abraham is asked to leave his country, his people, and his father's household to go to a land that would only be revealed to him over time. The heart of this relationship is defined by the Abrahamic covenant, which is structured around three specific promises: land, descendants, and blessing. At a time when Abraham was elderly and childless, he was promised that his offspring would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. This promise of descendants was not merely about biological survival but about the formation of a new nation that would carry a specific identity and purpose. The promise of land provided a physical space, the land of Canaan, where this nation could establish a society governed by the values of their Creator. These two elements, people and place, formed the necessary foundation for a distinct community to thrive in a world that had become fragmented after the events at Babel. The third and perhaps most vital component of the covenant is the promise of universal blessing. The text explicitly states that through Abraham, all the families of the earth would be blessed. This nuance is crucial because it clarifies that the election of Abraham was not an act of favoritism or exclusion. Rather, Abraham was chosen to be a conduit. The blessing intended for him and his family was always meant to overflow to the rest of the world, serving as a remedy for the curses introduced during the fall and the scattering at the Tower of Babel. This covenant is presented as an everlasting agreement, established by a divine oath that guarantees the eventual success of the plan despite the human flaws and obstacles that Abraham and his family would encounter. The development of this covenant throughout the life of Abraham also introduces the concept of faith as a relational trust. Several times, the narrative shows Abraham questioning how these promises could possibly come true given his circumstances, yet he is credited with righteousness because of his willingness to believe in the promise maker. This section of Genesis establishes a pattern where the divine plan moves forward not through human perfection, but through a persistent commitment to a promise. By the end of Abraham's life, while he only owned a small burial plot in the Promised Land and had only one heir of the promise, the foundation for the nation of Israel had been firmly laid, setting the stage for the generations of Isaac and Jacob to follow. The story of Joseph. Chapter 37-50. The story of Joseph represents the final major movement of Genesis, transitioning the narrative from a series of individual encounters with the divine into a complex, multi-layered drama of family dynamics and national survival. The account begins with deep-seated domestic friction, as Joseph's status as his father's favorite son, symbolized by his distinctive robe, and his prophetic dreams of superiority incite the jealousy of his 10 older brothers. This resentment eventually culminates in a profound act of betrayal where Joseph is sold into slavery and transported to Egypt. The nuance here lies in the total absence of direct divine intervention, unlike the stories of Abraham or Jacob, where God speaks clearly and frequently. The Joseph narrative unfolds through human choices, highlighting the hidden way providence operates behind the scenes of history. Joseph's experience in Egypt is defined by a cycle of undeserved suffering followed by unexpected elevation. He rises to a position of trust in the house of a high-ranking official, only to be falsely accused and imprisoned. Even in the depths of the dungeon, the narrative emphasizes that the presence of the Creator remained with him, manifesting as a gift for interpreting dreams. This ability eventually brings Joseph before Pharaoh, where he correctly predicts 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of severe famine. Because Joseph provides a practical plan to store grain during the years of plenty, he is appointed as the second most powerful man in Egypt. This part of the story illustrates how personal hardship can serve as a training ground for public leadership, preparing an individual to carry a weight of responsibility that will affect millions of lives. The climax of the story occurs when the famine reaches the land of Canaan, forcing Joseph's brothers to travel to Egypt to buy food. This leads to a series of tense, anonymous encounters where Joseph tests the character of his brothers to see if they have changed since the day they sold him. The nuanced resolution is not found in Joseph seeking revenge, but in his recognition of a higher purpose at work. When he finally reveals his identity, he offers a perspective that redefines the entire family history. He explains that while his brothers intended their actions for evil, the Creator intended those same actions for a greater good. This realization demonstrates that divine sovereignty can utilize even the most broken human intentions to achieve a life-preserving outcome. The conclusion of Genesis sees the entire family of Jacob, 70 people in total, moving from Canaan to the fertile region of Goshen in Egypt. This migration is bittersweet. While it ensures their survival and the fulfillment of the promise to make Abraham's descendants a great nation, it also places them in a foreign land where they will eventually face a different kind of trial. The book ends with the death of Joseph, who makes his brothers swear that when they eventually leave Egypt to return to the promised land, they will carry his bones with them. This final act of faith connects the end of Genesis back to the original promises made to his ancestors, ensuring that the story remains pointed toward a future homecoming. Reflections on patriarchal history. The patriarchal history of Genesis offers a compelling reflection on how a grand, divine vision is worked out through the messy reality of human relationships. Unlike the primeval history, which dealt with the entire world, these chapters show that history is often shaped in the quiet moments of a family tent or the difficult conversations between estranged brothers. The overarching lesson from the lives of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph is that the promises of the Creator are not dependent on human perfection. Instead, the narrative showcases a collection of flawed individuals who struggle with fear, deception, and jealousy, yet remain part of a larger plan that moves forward despite their shortcomings. A significant theme in this section is the concept of a long-term perspective. Abraham died having seen only a fraction of the promises made to him, and Joseph died in a foreign land, still looking back toward a home he had not seen in decades. This suggests that the journey of faith is often about planting seeds for a harvest that will be enjoyed by future generations. It reflects a shift from immediate gratification to a legacy of endurance, where the character of the individual is refined through waiting and through the testing of their trust in a promise that transcends their own lifetime. Ultimately, the patriarchal era serves as a bridge between the cosmic origins of the world and the national identity of a people. It teaches that redemption is a process that involves both the miraculous and the mundane. Whether it is the dramatic call of Abraham out of a distant land or the hidden providence that protected Joseph in a dark prison, the reflection remains the same. There is a purposeful intentionality behind the chaos of human life. The book of Genesis concludes by leaving the reader with a sense of hopeful tension, as a small family has grown into a community, waiting for the next chapter of their story to unfold. Key themes and literary features. To understand the depth of Genesis, it is helpful to look beyond the individual stories and examine the literary features and recurring themes that tie the book together. These elements act as the connective tissue of the narrative, providing a consistent message even as the setting shifts from the stars to the desert. The framework of covenant. One of the most prominent literary features in Genesis is the use of covenants, which are formal, binding agreements that define the relationship between the divine and the earthly. These are not merely contracts, but solemn commitments where the Creator binds himself to humanity. Throughout the book, these covenants serve as the engine of the plot. From the universal promise made to Noah never to destroy the earth again, to the specific, multi-generational promises made to Abraham, these agreements show a God who is willing to limit his own options to stay committed to a specific group of people. This theme establishes that the story of the Bible is not one of random interactions, but a structured history based on a series of divine oaths. The dual nature of the divine. Another central theme is the complex nature of God, who is presented with a unique duality. In the beginning of the book, the focus is on a transcendent creator, a powerful and distant being who brings the entire universe into existence simply by speaking. However, as the narrative progresses into the lives of the patriarchs, this same being is shown to be deeply personal. This is a God who walks in a garden in the cool of the day, who visits Abraham's tent to share a meal, and who wrestles with Jacob in the dark of the night. By portraying the divine as both the ruler of the cosmos and a personal companion who listens to the cries of the suffering, Genesis creates a portrait of a deity who is both infinitely great and intimately close. The reality of human frailty. A striking literary feature of Genesis is its brutal honesty regarding human frailty. Unlike many other ancient hero myths where the protagonists are depicted as perfect or semi-divine, the characters in Genesis are presented with all their flaws, lies, and mistakes. Abraham is shown as a man of great faith who also lies about his wife out of fear. Jacob is a deceptive schemer who manipulates his family for his own gain, and the sons of Israel are depicted as jealous and violent men who sell their own brother into slavery. This realistic portrayal serves a specific purpose. It emphasizes that the fulfillment of the divine plan depends on the faithfulness of the Creator rather than the perfection of the people. It makes the narrative relatable, suggesting that even the most broken families and flawed individuals can be part of a larger story of redemption. Significance of Genesis. The significance of Genesis lies in its unique ability to address the deepest questions of the human heart by focusing more on the why of existence than the technical how of the physical world. While modern readers often approach the text looking for scientific or historical data, the book itself seems more concerned with the meaning of our origin. It provides a definitive answer to the question of where we came from, asserting that humanity is the result of intentional love rather than a cosmic accident. It also provides a profound explanation for why the world is broken, locating the source of our collective suffering in the fracture of the human will. Most importantly, it answers the question of whether there is hope by showing that the Creator is more interested in pursuing a relationship with people than in abandoning them to their mistakes. As a literary and historical foundation, Genesis sets the stage for everything that follows in the biblical narrative and, arguably, much of Western literature. The themes introduced in its 50 chapters, exile and homecoming, sibling rivalry, the cost of sacrifice, and the power of forgiveness, become the templates for the rest of history. The events of Genesis create a narrative arc that demands a resolution. The promises made to Abraham regarding a land and a nation create a tension that drives the story through the Exodus from Egypt and into the establishment of the Kingdom of Israel. Without the context of Genesis, the rest of the biblical text would lack its primary motivation, as every subsequent book is essentially an account of how those early promises are being kept or challenged. On a more personal level, there is a striking beauty in the way the book transitions from the grand, cosmic scale of the stars and oceans to the intimate and often messy drama of a single family. It is a staggering literary move to begin with the creation of light itself and end with a family reconciliation in a grain storehouse in Egypt. This shift suggests that the God who manages the expansion of the universe is the same God who is concerned with the jealousies of brothers and the grief of an old man. It implies that history is not just made of big, sweeping movements, but of small, private choices made in the quiet of a home. Ultimately, the reflection Genesis offers is one of profound continuity. It teaches that while the world may feel chaotic and the human family may seem hopelessly divided, there is an underlying thread of purpose connecting the beginning of time to the present moment. By starting with a garden and ending with a family looking toward a promised future, Genesis provides a sense of belonging. It suggests that every individual, despite their frailty, is part of a massive, unfolding story that began long before them and will continue long after, guided by a persistent commitment to bring the world back to its original goodness.